It rarely begins with something obvious or dramatic. In fact, it often starts with intensity, a tension that feels almost intoxicating. She studies you, mirrors your desires, reflects your values back to you, so precisely that it feels like destiny rather than design. And this is where the first layer of control is established, not through force, but through attachment. You begin to feel seen in a way you may have never experienced before. But what appears as deep connection is often a calculated rhythm. Warmth is followed by distance. Affection is followed by subtle withdrawal. You are praised, then quietly ignored. This inconsistency is not random. It is psychologically disarming. The human mind is wired to seek resolution, to close emotional loops. So when something feels incomplete, you lean in harder, you try more, you give more. Without realizing it, you are being conditioned. Over time, your emotional stability becomes tied to her responses. Your mood begins to depend on her attention. When she is present, you feel elevated. When she withdraws, you feel unsettled, even anxious. This is the shift from independence to dependency, and it happens so gradually that you rarely notice the moment you lost your center. What makes this dynamic particularly dangerous is that you start to justify it. You tell yourself she is just complex, misunderstood, perhaps even wounded. You begin to rationalize behavior that under normal circumstances you would never accept. And in doing so, you abandon your own boundaries. From a psychological perspective, this is not love. It is attachment shaped by uncertainty, and uncertainty, when repeated, becomes addictive. You are no longer responding to her as a person, but to the emotional pattern she has created within you. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. The more you chase clarity from someone who thrives on confusion, the more you surrender your sense of self, because the moment your peace depends on someone else's unpredictability, you are no longer in control. What follows this emotional dependency is something even more destabilizing, something that operates not on your feelings alone, but on your perception of reality itself. It is subtle at first. Small contradictions, minor denials, moments where what you clearly experienced is gently rewritten. You bring up something she said, and she calmly insists it never happened. You question a behavior, and she reframes it in a way that makes your concern seem irrational. At this stage, you are not being attacked directly. You are being reoriented. Your internal compass, the very mechanism you rely on to interpret truth, begins to falter. And because the shift is gradual, you don't immediately resist it. You adapt to it. The human psyche seeks coherence. When faced with conflicting versions of reality, it attempts to reconcile them. But here's the danger. Instead of rejecting the falsehood, you begin to question your own memory. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. These thoughts do not arise from weakness, but from a deeply ingrained desire to maintain psychological balance. Over time, this creates a profound internal fracture. You are no longer certain of what is real, what was said, or even how you truly feel. Your confidence in your own perception diminishes, and in its place grows a quiet dependence on her version of events. She becomes, in effect, the authority of your reality. And once that happens, control is no longer external, it is internalized. You begin to self correct, to second guess, to silence your instincts before they even reach the surface. The manipulation no longer needs to be active because it has already taken root within you. From a philosophical standpoint, this is the erosion of the self. To doubt your own perception is to lose your grounding in the world. Without that grounding, you become malleable, easier to influence, easier to shape. And the realization you must confront is this: when you stop trusting your own mind, you hand over the very foundation of your identity. Because once your reality is no longer yours, neither is your freedom. Once your perception has been destabilized, the next mechanism does not arrive with noise, but with absence. It is not what is said that shapes you, it is what is withheld. Communication, which should serve as a bridge between two minds, is replaced by silence that feels deliberate, calculated. You reach out, and there is nothing. No explanation, no closure, no acknowledgement, only a void that you are left to interpret. This silence is not neutral, it carries weight. The human mind is not designed to sit comfortably in emotional ambiguity, so it begins to fill the gap. You replay conversations, analyze your words, search for the exact moment you might have gone wrong. And in that process, you turn inward, not in reflection, but in self blame. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that it reverses the natural order of responsibility. Instead of questioning the withdrawal, you question yourself. The absence of response becomes a form of judgment, and without realizing it, you begin to seek redemption for something that may not even exist. Over time, this creates a behavioral pattern. You become more cautious, more agreeable, more willing to suppress your own needs just to avoid triggering that silence again. Your expression narrows, your authenticity becomes conditional. You are no longer acting freely, you are adapting to avoid emotional exile. From a psychological perspective, this is a form of conditioning through deprivation. Attention is given, then taken away. Connection is offered, then withheld. And the inconsistency reinforces your desire to restore what was lost. You are not simply reacting to her absence, you are being trained by it. There is also a deeper philosophical dimension to this. Silence, when used in this way, becomes a tool of control because it removes the possibility of dialogue. Without dialogue, there is no mutual understanding, only assumption. And assumption, when driven by insecurity, almost always turns against the self. The critical point to recognize is this: when someone uses silence to control you, they are not seeking resolution, they are establishing dominance. Because the moment you start begging for a voice that chose to disappear, you have already surrendered your own. After the silence has done its work, after you have questioned yourself, softened your boundaries, and learned to anticipate withdrawal, another shift begins to take shape. It is no longer about confusion or absence, but about inversion. The roles quietly reverse. The one who caused the disruption now presents herself as the one who has been wronged. You may attempt to express a concern, something reasonable, something grounded in your lived experience. But instead of being met with accountability, you are met with distress. Hers, not yours. The conversation is redirected. Your issue dissolves, and suddenly you find yourself comforting the very person who unsettled you. It is disorienting, but also strangely compelling because it appeals to your sense of empathy. This is where the dynamic deepens. Your natural instinct to understand, to be fair, to care. These qualities are not flaws, but they are being used against you. Each time you try to assert your reality, it is reframed as an attack. Each time you seek clarity, it is interpreted as insensitivity. And so, gradually, you begin to associate your own voice with harm. Over time, this creates a subtle but powerful internal conflict. You begin to hesitate before speaking, not because you lack clarity, but because you anticipate the emotional consequences. It becomes easier to stay silent, to let things pass, to carry the weight quietly rather than risk becoming the problem. Psychologically, this is the erosion of moral confidence. You no longer trust your right to feel what you feel. Your emotional responses are filtered through her reactions, And in doing so, you lose your connection to your own truth. You are not just being misunderstood, you are being redefined. There is also a philosophical dimension here that is difficult to ignore. When someone consistently avoids responsibility by adopting the position of the victim, they are not merely protecting themselves, they are reshaping the moral structure of the relationship. Right and wrong become fluid, determined not by reality, but by emotional performance. And the consequence is profound. You begin to carry guilt that does not belong to you, because the moment you accept responsibility for another person's manipulation, you abandon responsibility for your own truth. As this internal erosion continues, your perception weakened, your voice softened, your sense of responsibility distorted. Another layer is introduced, of one that does not isolate you, but instead places you in quiet competition. It is subtle, often disguised as casual mention, a name brought up here, a comparison implied there, someone from her past, someone from her present, or even someone entirely ambiguous, yet always positioned just enough to make you aware that you are not alone in her attention. At first, you may dismiss it. You tell yourself it is harmless, perhaps even unintentional. But over time, the pattern reveals itself. These references are not random, they are strategically placed. They create a psychological triangle in which your value begins to feel conditional. You are no longer simply relating to her, you are measuring yourself against others who may or may not even be real threats. This dynamic awakens something deeply primal, the fear of replacement. And once that fear is activated, your behavior begins to shift. You become more accommodating, more attentive, more willing to prove your worth, not because you are inadequate, but because the environment has been structured to make you feel that way. From a psychological standpoint, this is a form of induced insecurity. Your attention is no longer grounded in mutual connection, but in competition. And competition, especially when undefined, is exhausting. You are chasing a standard that is constantly moving, trying to secure a position that is never clearly yours. What makes this particularly disorienting is that the comparison is rarely explicit. It lives in implication, in tone, in suggestion, and because it is not directly stated, you cannot directly confront it. You are left to interpret, to speculate, to internalize. Philosophically, this fractures your sense of identity. Instead of knowing who you are, you begin to define yourself in relation to others. Your worth becomes comparative rather than intrinsic. And in that shift, you lose the stability that comes from self-definition. The realization you must arrive at is not about them. It is about you. Because the moment you start competing for a place that should have been freely given, you have already accepted a position beneath your own value. And then, after all the confusion, the self-doubt, the quiet competition, there comes an ending, but not the kind most people expect. There is no meaningful closure, no mutual understanding, no sense of resolution. Instead, there is a sudden shift, a withdrawal that feels final, almost clinical. The connection that once felt so intense is now treated as if it were insignificant, easily discarded. What makes this moment so difficult to comprehend is not just the loss itself, but the contrast. You remember the intensity, the emotional investment, the effort you poured into maintaining the connection, and yet, in this inal phase, it is as if none of it ever held weight. You are left trying to reconcile two opposing realities, what you experienced and how it is now being dismissed. Psychologically, this is the culmination of everything that came before. By this point, your sense of self has already been destabilized. Your perception has been questioned, your voice softened, your value made conditional. So when the final separation occurs, it does not just feel like rejection, it feels like confirmation. Confirmation of every doubt that was planted along the way. But this is precisely where clarity must begin, because the ending is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of the pattern. The discard is not about you failing. It is about the dynamic reaching its natural conclusion. Once the emotional structure has been extracted, once your energy, attention, and validation have been absorbed, there is nothing left to sustain the illusion. From a philosophical perspective, this moment holds a quiet opportunity. Stripped of the external influence, you are faced with yourself again, not the version shaped by confusion, but the one that existed before it. And while that confrontation may feel uncomfortable, it is also the beginning of restoration. The critical question is not why it ended, but what you choose to reclaim from it. Because the moment you stop seeking meaning in how they left and start rebuilding who you are without them, that is the moment you take your power back.